Okay, I think we can start class now. Can everybody hear me? I hope
I hear you.
and you can see the screen.
Yeah, it's fine. Okay.
Okay, so the class website is now posted on the physics department website. Um, the actual email address is up there. It's panda3.phys.unm.edu/tilde/Kevin/480-21. So that's the email address. And or you can just click on the link on the department's webpage. Um, so this particular link here takes you to Physical English, uh, which is a book that I'm writing, and I may finish it, I may not finish it. I'm not really sure about that. Um, it it's the reason why I'm not so keen on finishing the book is that Cambridge University Press wants me to produce something that's like 200 pages, and I don't think I have 200 pages to write about this subject. Um, so I don't know what's going to happen with that. Um, so let me maybe start with some of the things that let's see. It says here the internet connection is unstable. Well, I hope that improves. Um, the basic point of this first section is that good writing is clear writing, good speaking is clear speaking, and the good writers recognize that there's a big difference between natural human speech between two people and reading something that somebody else has written. Um, Ordinary speech between two people standing in front of each other, that's a natural human activity. We've been doing it for maybe 100,000 years, I don't know. But writing was invented more recently, and it's unnatural, and reading is unnatural. Um, it's not illegal, of course, but it's uh, it's not as natural as speaking and listening to somebody speak. Let me raise this table a little bit. Um, so since reading requires some effort on the part of the reader, it's important for the writer to make the reading as easy as possible. And one does that, well, there are a lot of techniques for doing it, but the important thing is to keep in mind that the goal of writing is not to show off. The goal of writing is to make it easy for the reader to read and to make it easy for the reader to understand what you want the reader to understand. And of course, none of this makes any sense unless what it is that you're writing about is something that for some reason the reader would like to know and understand. Um, so those are the main points, and to some extent, these things that I'm saying to you now that are very simple are the most important part of the course, and they're in this early section of my notes on writing. Um, they were summarized very well by an English writer, um, George Orwell, who, of course, is famous for many books. And he gave us 6 rules for writing in English. The first is never use a metaphor, simile, or figure of speech that you're used to seeing in print. Orwell was concerned with politics and was very critical of politicians and the way they speak and misuse language. So this point applies more to politicians and people writing about current events than to us, to you and me, who might be writing about physics. However, point 2 is really important. Take it to heart. Never use a long word where a short one will do. Notice his words. Most of them are one syllable. Use a long word where a short one will do. That's the ideal way to write, in words of 1, 2, 3, or 4, or 5 letters and only one syllable. I was amazed, by the way, reading Winston Churchill's History of the English-Speaking Peoples, where I had to use a dictionary, but I was looking up 4-letter words. These were 4-letter English words that apparently were things that were common in Churchill's environment, but not in mine. And I had to look up words that were only 4 letters long. But of course, what he did was he wrote very well by following Rule 2, among others. Rule 3 is, if it is possible to cut a word out, always cut it out. So in other words, if you have a sentence, and it'll mean the same thing if you drop a word, a particular word, drop that word and get it down so the sentence is as short as possible. So in other words, rule 3 is effectively never use a long sentence where a short one will do. Rule 4, never use the passive where you can use the active. So say things like, John picked up the book, and not the book was picked up by John. Of course, notice that what Orwell says, he doesn't say never use the passive. He says never use the passive where you can use the active. There are places where the passive is in fact useful. And some of these are described very nicely in a book by a Harvard professor of psychology. What is his name? Well, I hope it'll come to me. It's probably on this page here somewhere. Well, I don't remember his name. Anyway, he's we'll rediscover him at some point. Rule 5 is never use a foreign phrase, a scientific word, or a jargon word if you can think of an everyday English equivalent. And this is important because these foreign words, scientific words, jargon words, are words that are less meaningful. They don't stick in the brain. A dramatic example, which is violated in almost every book on quantum mechanics, is, and quantum field theory for that matter, is the vacuum expectation value. That is a horrible phrase, but that's the way it appears in quantum field theory. In quantum mechanics, it's the expectation value. That is really an almost meaningless phrase. Once Gelman remarked that it was an abuse of English, and one should say the mean value. And so I switched immediately to using the term the mean value instead of the expectation value. one could say the expected value, but why say expected when actually what you mean is the average value of the operator in a particular state. In fact, I did attach I didn't think I would have any use for writing myself in this, but I think I will. And in order to get that going, I need to go over here and click on Quicktime Player, File, New Movie Recording, iPad. Okay, so in other words, we might have some vector x in some state psi. This is in Dirac notation. Now, in most quantum mechanics book, this is said to be the expectation value of the operator x. And as I said, Gelman said, well, don't say that, say the mean value. And in fact, one of my colleagues, the Professor Elizabeth Crossan, when I mentioned to her that this was a better phrase than that, she looked up Dirac's book on quantum mechanics, and Dirac pointed out, well, he didn't point out, he just used the term not mean value, but the average value. And once you say the term, the average value, that this is the average value of the position of the particle or the system or whatever, it's suddenly clearer and you understand it better. And that's because that's exactly what it is mathematically. This psi x psi is, of course, an integral, d cubed y, let us say, psi of y, absolute value squared, y, if assuming the wave function is normalized. And this, of course, is exactly the average value. Now, mean value means the same thing, but average is so much clearer, a more common word, commonly used word than mean. And so I've now since then switched to Dirac's usage, which is average value. So that's an example of never using a foreign word, a scientific word, a jargon word when you can think of an everyday English equivalent. Average is everyday English. Expectation value, it's not even English. It's what various German scientists who emigrated to the United States during World War II to flee Hitler's Germany. And these guys, of course, had English as a second or third language. And so their English wasn't so great. And they were translating literally from the German or from something that they thought of as the right English. But there are many cases in modern scientific writing where this rule 5 is violated left, right, and center, and it makes for lousy writing. It makes the articles hard to read. It makes them less meaningful. And then, of course, in a flash of humility, Orwell says, well, break any of the rules rather than say something that's just appalling. Now, let me invite all of you to speak up as much as you want, ask questions or make comments, or tell me what it is that you'd like me to talk about. Otherwise, I'll just sort of ramble on, unrestrained and unguided. One example of rule one is avoid phrases like send a message or going forward when they're not needed. Another example is moving forward. How many times do you hear a CEO of some corporation say that, or some politician say a country's going to move forward? So it's, of course, again, we are not, when writing about physics, we don't normally get tempted to say, use silly expressions like that, but we use other expressions. Examples of rule two, in other words, the use of short words rather than long words. Here's Winston Churchill's 1940 speech to the House of Commons. We shall go to the end, we shall fight in France. We shall, I tell you, the writing is so good, it makes me emotional. We shall fight on the seas and oceans. We shall fight with growing confidence and growing strength in the air. We shall defend our island, whatever the course may be, and so forth. You can read it. It's the reason it has such an emotional punch is partly the use of short words, but of course it's more than that. It's just so incredibly concrete and easy to read. Most of the words are words of one syllable and of Anglo-Saxon origin. The English language is an Anglo-Saxon language. It, of course, it's a highly mixed language because the island has been invaded many times by Vikings, by Germans, and most notably by the French. And so there are a large number of French and Latin words. The Latin and French words are usually used less often, have more syllables, and are more complicated. And it's best to avoid them and to use the simple Anglo-Saxon words. For example, many instead of multiple. Another example of rule three, let's remember what rule three is. If you can cut a word out, cut it out. Use then instead of at that point in time. Use now instead of at this point in time. Avoid useless adjectives and adverbs. Gore Vidal, who was one of the wittiest people of in modern America, wrote of John Updike, might Updike not have allowed one blind noun to slip free of its seeing eye adjective? So he was criticizing Updike essentially for using adjectives when they were not needed. Also adverbs when they're not needed. And in fact, if you look at most writing, you will find that there are a large number of adjectives and adverbs that are not needed. Let's look at Churchill again here. We shall go on to the end. No adjectives, no adverbs. We shall fight in France. No adjectives, no adverbs. We shall fight on the seas and oceans. No adjectives, no adverbs. We shall fight with, okay, growing is a sort of participle, functioning as an adverb. So that's twice. Still no adverbs, adjectives. We fight on the beaches, we fight on the landing grounds. Landing grounds, okay, but on the other hand, it was a necessary adjective. I mean, the point is you have there's a role to be played by adjectives and adverbs. It's just don't overuse them. And in the streets, we shall fight in the hills, we shall never submit. So there were only 3 or 4 adjectives in the whole paragraph, and they were all necessary for meaning and clarity. Let's look at rule 5. Rule 5, use formulas instead of formulae. use novas instead of novae, use supernovas instead of supernovae. This, again, it's when you say formulas or supernovas, the person reading or listening knows exactly what you mean. When you say supernovae, unless the person has studied Latin, and fewer of us, for good reason, study Latin, people don't know really what that means, supernovae. And in fact, it's pronounced these days 3 different ways: supernovae, supernovae, and supernovae. And in fact, since it's Latin, nobody knows how to pronounce it because the language has been dead for over 1,500 years. Supernovae is probably the closest because that's the way the Italians would pronounce it. But the point is that then people who haven't studied Latin don't know what to do with this word. They sometimes use it as though it were singular. They sometimes use it as an adjective, whereas normally in English adjectives are singular, not plural. We say blue eyes, not blues eyes. So I'd encourage all of you to always use an English plural if one is available that sounds nice. There are some English words of Latin origin that don't have nice English plurals. And so it's okay to use, or maybe even one should use, the Latin plural or the Greek plural or whatever the other language is. Colloquium, for example, colloquiums, it's kind of a mouthful. So I don't know, colloquia sounds better. But there's certainly nothing wrong with saying colloquiums. In fact, I think you can take any foreign word, add an S, and you're okay. The exceptions are simply, I don't know, some biblical name words that end in S are problematic. Oh, and of course, if the word English singular ends in S, then you don't add another S. The plural of bus is buses, not bus. Example of Rule 6. That's, in other words, break the rule. Well, you can break Rule 4 when it is good for clarity, for the flow of a sentence. For example, or because you don't know or must conceal the identity of the subject, as in JFK was assassinated in November of 1963. Well, I suppose the CIA and the FBI may know who did it, but most of us don't. And so we use the plural. Another reason, it's Steven Pinker is the name of the professor. Another reason for using the passive is that it improves the flow of the sentence sometimes. So he gives this example: a man arrives from Corinth. It emerges that this messenger was formerly a shepherd on Mount Cithaeron, and that he was given a baby, which the childless Polybus then adopted. The baby, he says, was given to him by another shepherd from the Laius household, who had been told to get rid of the child. The passive voice keeps the focus on the baby, and if you try to avoid the use of the passive, you would be starting sentences not with the baby, but with something else, and it just wouldn't read as well. So there's a use in English for the passive. It's not just in order to be obscure or to conceal the identity of a subject, or to avoid identifying the subject because you don't know who the subject was. So the main thing is if you follow Orwell's rules, as modified, of course, by Steven Pinker, your writing will be easier to read. It will be tight and free of extra words and phrases that distract and tire the reader. One of the editors of the Albuquerque Journal, who lived up the street from me until recently, once used the phrase, when I was discussing writing with him, he used the phrase "write tight." And that's what they say at newspapers, namely, get rid of the stupid extra words that don't do anybody any good and just make it harder to make the person throw away the newspaper and cancel a subscription because his time is being wasted. So let's see, there's another aspect of things here. It's a book by Daniel Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow, which is quite an interesting book. And he has various things to say that support the rules of Orwell's rules 2 to 5 particularly. And Kahneman wrote, if you care about being thought credible and intelligent, do not use complex language where simpler language will do. And on the class website, I've got various links to things. In particular, one is Daniel Oppenheimer's article, Consequences of Erudite Vernacular Utilized Irrespective of Necessity, Problems with Using Long Words Needlessly. So there's an article that says, once again, to use short words if you can. And so there's these long words that he has, from consequences to the colon here, he's making fun of people who use excessively long words. There's a physicist at New York University. He may have retired by now, but 10 or 20 years ago, he wrote an article, submitted it to a journal, a very, how shall I say, a very intellectual journal, one that few people read, and no one read with pleasure. Anyway, he wrote an article in which he made sure carefully that no sentence in the article meant anything. But he used the words that the people who write in the article, who write articles in that journal, use all the time. And his use of those words gave the impression that he was agreeing with some of the political and intellectual opinions of the people who write in that journal. And his article was published. And then after it was published and mailed out to the subscribers, he then announced that his article was a hoax, and he was just making fun of people who write poorly and who used the most elaborate words possible rather than simple words. And that when you use such elaborate words, you can write an article in which no sentence means anything. Every sentence was inconsistent or meaningless. So they also, by the way, Orwell's rules, this is the thing I like best about Orwell's rules, is that they make writing easier. I know when I was a student first writing physics articles, I just went crazy because I could think of 10 different ways to write every sentence. And you know, after I figured out what sentence 1 would be, and I'd go on to sentence 2 and I'd have 10 different words. But then if I picked a particular one of the 10 rules in sentence 2, maybe I should go back and change sentence 1. And it was just driving me nuts. And what Orwell's rules did was they basically, if I had these 10 different ways of writing a given sentence, I just thought about Orwell's rules and eliminated 9 of them and went on to the next sentence. So it was an enormous relief to me. to find Orwell's rules. The clarity of writing, the Graves and Hodge wrote a book on writing, and one of the things they pointed out was something I had never heard, and I'd never seen it anywhere else. Not that I'm a historian or read much history. It's that the disastrous charge of the Light Brigade at Balaclava in the Crimean War was made because of a carelessly worded order to charge for the guns. What was meant was to haul some of the British guns to a safer place. So he meant everybody should move the guns, actually move the guns backwards into a safer place. And instead, the people thought that they were supposed to charge the guns of the enemy. And of course, they almost all were killed. Boeing, of course, has this disastrous plane. I forget the name of the plane, 737 MAX or something. And they called their defective software maneuvering characteristics augmentation system, which of course is such an abuse of language. They've got, for one thing, if you have an adjective, a compound adjective, you're supposed to hyphenate it. And then secondly, look at how many syllables there are in every one of these words. Characteristics is plural, that shouldn't be an adjective. It's just a mess. If instead they had called it anti-stall auto dive system, then airlines and airports would have studied it, because they don't want to be flying a plane without knowing how the anti-stall auto dive mechanism works. And there'd be 346 people alive, and Boeing would be several $billion wealthier. More advice is try to put complicated phrases at the end of your sentences. And because that's where the reader pauses and can naturally pause and understand them without worrying about the rest of the sentence. So Thomas Jefferson did not write the pursuit of happiness, liberty, and life. He wrote life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The pursuit of happiness being a much more complicated thought than life or liberty. And of course, liberty is more complicated than life also, so he put liberty after life. So in the writing that we remember, because it was so good that we remember it, you can find out that you can discover that you will find, if you look at it, those writings, that these various rules are followed. Now, of course, when we're writing physics articles, we're not talking about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We're talking about electrons and protons and scattering angles and cross sections and so forth. And these things are less dramatic and emotional than the things that the writers we write about. But nonetheless, all of these rules apply to writing physics articles. So the clearer you make the article, the better the article will be. It'll also help the writer, and it will clarify. If you write a clear paper, you will think about your physics more clearly, and you will have better ideas about what to do next. You might ask me now, what is important in general about the presentation of the physics content in a research paper? And it's the answer, I guess, is you should make the physics clear so that the reader can easily understand it. It takes only a few words to define most terms and concepts. Definitions reassure the reader, and one undefined term that happens to be new to a particular reader can make that reader, put your paper down and mark you as someone to avoid. And there's another aspect of defining the terms that you use in the early part of your paper, or at least before you use the term, and it's that academics love to be taught something that they already know, because it reassures them of the range of their knowledge. And now, of course, too much of that, it's boring, but it's just reassuring to a reader to be told something that he already knew, especially some technical physics concept. All right, let's go on to another question. What is the most important information of a research paper that should be included in the introduction and abstract, apart from motivating the topic? And it's that you should describe your main results briefly in the abstract and more clearly in the introduction. So you need to describe your results, and you also should sketch the background in which your new physics makes sense, briefly in the abstract, more completely in the introduction. So what is a good introduction and abstract of a research paper in physics? Brief is good, but clear is better. And long and obscure is terrible. Ideally, the background should convince the reader that your work is a step forward for physics. Won't I still get credit for my work even if my paper is poorly written and hard to read? And the fact is, your members of your research group and your parents will give you credit, but no one else will unless they talk to your colleagues, and your colleagues who understand what you were doing explain what you were doing to them. So it's important to write well. One of the things that struck me when I was trying to first write about writing is because I had to look to find examples of good writing. And what struck me was that the top professors at Harvard write well. And since then, my first thought was, well, they're so smart, they can do everything well. And there's probably some truth in that, but I think a more logical reason is that the reason why they're professors at Harvard is not only that they did great work, but that they described their work in papers that people could read and understand easily, and that the people making the promotion decisions and the hiring decisions at Harvard read those papers and said, oh, this guy is pretty good. And of course, they also gave talks at Harvard, and the talks were good talks and impressed the people. So basically, it's also true, I think, that funding agencies will fund research that's described well. So it's certainly true, of course, that somebody who produces a formula that describes the masses of all the elementary particles could write a paper saying, here's the formula, and write it down, and that's it. Send it to PRL, be published, and the guy would get, or a woman would get a Nobel Prize, no doubt about it. But apart from, exceptional cases like that, the quality of the writing has a big effect on how the paper or the physics is judged by the wider community. There's a higher level to writing above what I've been saying, telling you about is the basics of good writing. Now, it doesn't mean that these basics are actually followed. They're not typically. Most writing is terrible. Most academic writing is dreadful. Most business writing is dreadful. But there is something I'm not going to try to explain, which is the higher level of writing, that's literary writing. The best I can say is read the articles of the best writers, such as Feynman, Coleman, Dyson, Glashow, Glauber, Weinberg, Witten, Z, and others, Linus Pauling in chemistry. The authors who wrote Molecular Biology, The Cell in Molecular Biology, and of course the great writers Tolstoy, Hemingway, Churchill, Woolf, Fitzgerald, Wilde, Joyce, and so forth. Orwell's rules aren't a recipe for good writing, for great writing, but violating them certainly ruins great writing. They're necessary but not sufficient, and I don't think anyone can tell us how to write, on a literary, on the level of high literature. Know your audience, and this is important for clarity. In other words, you need to know what the people who are reading the article understand and know about, because you have to explain to them, you have to explain what you're doing in a way that they can understand it. So you have to know your audience, and knowing your audience, you explain what you're doing to them. And so that's basically that idea. So one way of communicating to a large audience of strangers is to explain the physics from scratch, using only concepts you're sure that they know about. That's, of course, not normally the situation we're in, except in public talks. Instead, we're really thinking about physics articles that go in a particular journal, and you have some idea of what the people who read that journal know about. But of course, physics is such a broad field, and there's so many subfields, and there's so many concepts that you've got to explain things. And you also, of course, need to know what your audience wants to understand, and you need to explain that. Now, of course, that presupposes that you've done some work that actually does explain something that somebody wants to know about. Here are some just random tips. Vary the lengths of your sentences. A short sentence can have a big impact if it follows many longer sentences. Here's an example from a paper on two colliding clusters of galaxies. The actual existence of dark matter can only be confirmed either by a laboratory detection or, in an astronomical context, by the discovery of a system in which the observed baryons and the inferred dark matter are spatially segregated. An ongoing galaxy cluster merger is such a system. So this last sentence, being short, has more of an effect because it is short, and because it follows a long sentence. Of course, use a speller. I frankly changed schools when I was in elementary school, and the impression I have is that I left the first school before they taught spelling and arrived at the second one after they had taught spelling. And so I never learned to spell. It's not true that I never learned to spell, of course, but I've never been, one of the great spellers. I always look things up. But since we write on computers connected to the internet, you can always just type the word into Google and bingo, Google will correct it for you without even your asking for it. And they'll give you a definition. And that's important also to know what the definition is. And if you have a long word, you can ask for synonyms and see if one of the synonyms gives you something shorter. Use correct grammar. And the reason for that is, well, there are various reasons. One is that mistakes distract readers and annoy listeners. Also, grammatical errors lower the level of trust that your audience has in you. Now, of course, if English is your second language and you have an accent, then you get something of a pass. But if you have an American accent, you don't get a pass. And if you make a grammatical mistake and you're speaking English with an American accent or an English accent or an Irish accent or an Australian accent, and you make a mistake, you get marked down for it. Now, of course, in writing, if you have a last name that's an English type last name, then you also get really, people look down on you for a mistake. You can get away with it to some extent if you're French, if you have a French surname, Chinese surname, Japanese surname, African surname, Russian surname, and so forth. But basically, you should learn English grammar, and I assume you've studied it. And you can also use Google to answer most questions about grammar. And I think there may be some online things that help that. I haven't used them because I trust my own grammar, but I think that one can put a sentence just that you're not sure of into Google with a question mark at the end, and you may get some help with it. What's in it for the reader? Well, your article is more likely to be read or published if it seems to offer something that would benefit the reader. So that's obvious, but of course it's not necessarily anything that you can do when you're much about when you're writing the article. Well, that's something that you do when you're doing the research, namely you're trying to make a discovery that would be of interest to somebody or explain something in your article that would be of interest to somebody. But once you've explained that, at least to yourself, or made that discovery, well, you have to make plain to the reader that this is what you've got that the reader should be interested in, and explain to the reader, hey, you're going to learn about this cool thing if you read the article. And so papers that announce a better measurement of an important observable or the discovery of a new particle get published immediately. In fact, in Phys Rev letters. Talks with such content are well attended. Usually, of course, our content is less striking. What do you do? Well, we can tell the reader or listener why what we have to say is something that they want to know about. For example, we could review the present state of confusion about an issue and say how we clarify it. Some journals of biology and medicine are highly stylized, and in fact, in the first paragraph, they say that the answer is unknown. Then the later paragraph, they give the answer. I just find this absurd. Let's see, we're actually out of time. There haven't been many questions. In fact, I don't think there was a single one. Does somebody want to say something that would provide me with guidance for class next week?
Hi, Professor.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, I think I already took this course, which was launched in 2018, and I think I took with you. Only I saw like the contents are same, but only the difference I saw is at the time it was physical English title, but
Yeah.
now it is advanced seminar. Sorry, advanced writing, right?
So it's essentially the same. I mean, it's the same course. It it might be slightly different this time. There might be more examples of good writing, but I don't know. You might learn something take a second time, but but I can't tell you that it's going to be radically different. No, it's not a new course. It's the same course, and I hope I've improved it, but
yeah, I'm realizing right now like I have all this stuff, and then I remember those contents too. So that was face-to-face class, and yeah, we really enjoyed a lot at that time. I think we were around 8-10 people more
yeah,
that class. Yeah,
right.
and yeah, okay, yeah, I think so. Yeah, I'm thinking whether I would go continuing, because I think it will be a repetition kind of thing more about, but I don't know how much you want to go with some new of the stops. So for me for today, I thought of like more or that I already got it.
You'd like more what?
No, I thought like I already got those of things that you are studying right now.
Uh-huh.
So I'm not sure like how it goes in future.
Well, you can look at the class website and look at these various things
Okay, yeah, makes sense.
and decide whether you want to listen to the lectures or not, and whether you want to register for the course or not.
Okay.
There is an issue, though, that unless a few students register, the course is going to be canceled. So it'd be nice if a few students registered. I don't know how many we need. We may not need more than 2 or 3. Probably not, since it's only a 1-credit course. But
Yeah, but it is fine, right? Anytime we can join. Either we don't register for the course also, but we can
yeah,
join.
you can dial in and listen to it, whether or not
Okay.
you're registered for it.
Okay.
Well, there is this one thing. If you want, you see, at some point, I'm not going to be sending emails to every physics student with an invitation, because that's just going to be annoying to most students. So what I would ask you to do is, if you want to if you want to get if you want me to send you links to the lectures and you don't register for the course, then send me an email asking me to include your name in the
Mailing list, right?
in the
Okay.
Zoom announcements, because
Oh,
I
okay.
shouldn't keep sending it out to everybody in the
Yeah,
department.
yeah, okay, yeah, that makes more better, I believe. Okay, thank you so much.
All right, so I'm going to end the class now unless there's a final question.
I don't have any questions.
Okay. Anyway, there's a lot on this web page. You can click on it and look at things. All right, I'm going to say goodbye now. Try not to get sick.
Thank you.